Recording in progress.
Welcome to Love and Live Abundantly. I'm Ilona.
I'm Bill. Do you want to love more effectively?
Do you want to live fully and love more courageously?
We talk about what all that means
and how you can achieve it.
Join us. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast. We just had some technical difficulties, and we were trying to iron them out. And I'm pretty certain we haven't gotten it right yet, but we're going to plug on. Last time we talked, actually the last several times, we were talking about depression, about suicidality, about suicidal ideation, about what to do if you have someone in your life who is depressed, if you're depressed, if you don't want to be depressed. We pretty much beat that depression horse several times. They say stop beating a dead horse. Well, I'm sure we're going to come back to depression at some point, but it also occurred to us when we went off the air that we were missing about half of what really afflicts people in terms of mental health. When I was going to school, they gave us all these lessons about mental illness and about mental health issues and so forth, and so they showed us all these really dramatic kinds of mental illnesses like schizophrenia and psychosis and other big deal mental illnesses. And they're exciting and they're interesting to look at, and multiple personalities and all the rest of that. Very dramatic, and it's the stuff to make movies about. But if you talk to the National Institute of Mental Health, what you discover is what they should have been spending 90% of their time with us was on the things that afflict most of us 90% of the time. And that's two classes of diagnoses. One, of course, is depression. Yeah. Obviously, we think so. We've just spent several weeks dealing with it. But the other one is anxiety disorders. And between depression and anxiety disorders, roughly 90% of the mental problems that people have can be accounted for by those two. Now when I'm saying this out loud, it occurs to me that in my practice, that's what I saw. I didn't see a lot of folks who were hallucinating actively in my office. I didn't see a lot of people who had 5 personalities. Actually, I didn't see hardly any at all. What I saw was people profoundly depressed who had the screaming memes or the heebie-jeebies or whatever they happened to call them, that they were so anxious that they couldn't function. They were tied up in knots because they had an agitated depression, which is really just kind of a big depression with anxiety going on with it. So that leads us to today, and that is, okay, we've been talking about depression for a while. Let's shift over to the other half of that terrible 90% equation. And that is anxiety. Right?
And there are times where anxiety is very helpful to us, right?
Actually, anxiety is necessary.
Yeah.
This much. I'm sorry. No, if this is an audio, my finger is about an inch apart. My fingers are about an inch apart. Yeah. Yes, you have to have anxiety. Yeah, no question.
If you see a 8-foot bear coming at you, anxiety is going to help you keep yourself safe.
Actually, if you see a bear coming at you, the clinical name for that is fear. Yeah. Here's the deal. There's two things in my business that lead to confusion because we call them both anxiety. The first one starts way back when Sigmund Freud, the guy with the goatee and the cigars and everything, started talking about this stuff. And he said that there is this energy in us. Now, he called it sexual energy and all the rest of that. But what he recognized and what every neo-Freudian, neo-analytical person, the early psychiatry types said was that there's this energy called anxiety, and it drives us, it motivates us, it moves us along. In fact, if you've ever sat around with an adolescent for more than 20 minutes, you've seen the salutary effects of anxiety. When an adolescent says, "I'm bored," what they're telling you is, "I'm anxious and I don't have anything to bind my anxiety to." So you say, well, then get your butt up and go do something. Bind your anxiety. Instead, what they'll do is they'll pick up a phone and they'll play a game as a way of binding their anxiety. Wish they wouldn't do that. But the truth is, it's a motivator. If I'm sitting around and I'm feeling uncomfortable and I feel like I ought to be doing something, I mean, my wife says that all the time. You know my wife, and you know she doesn't sit still. She doesn't know how to do that. Well, it's anxiety that drives her. So she gets up and she, like her mother, find comfort. They bind their anxiety with cleaning. I bind my anxiety with doing things like this with you, or with cooking, or with woodworking. People bind their anxieties in lots of different ways, and it leads us to be motivated to do stuff. And most of the stuff we do is pretty good. Now, when that anxiety when you habitually bind it with something that's antisocial or self-harmful or whatever, then it's not so pretty good. But if you didn't have anxiety of any amount, you would fall into a category that you don't see anymore, but it's catatonic. You would sit there and you would be motionless. The second kind of anxiety that we have to talk about, though, is pathological anxiety. And that's the kind of anxiety that really fits the general definition. And that is, if it happens to you in such a degree and for such a period of time that it interferes with one or more areas of your life, you have an anxiety disorder. And there's a gazillion of them. There are so many anxiety disorders, it's ridiculous. But if it ties you up in knots, if it gets in your way of having relationships or doing your work, or of having a healthy lifestyle, or of getting out of bed in the morning or leaving the house, if it does any of those kind of things, any of those kinds of things to you, that's anxiety. And we have a lot of labels for it, but it's pathological. It's sick anxiety.
Somebody had said to me once that anxiety is worrying about other people's expectations of us.
That's one form, for it, certainly. It's a mild form of social anxiety. And that's the thing. You can tell it's pathological anxiety because it's got a qualifier in front of it. So there's generalized anxiety. There's generalized anxiety disorder. There's social anxiety.
Do people even necessarily understand that? I don't think that. I think people just feel anxious. They may not know that it stems from wanting to meet other people's expectations.
That's one source. That's one source. Yeah. There's all kinds of phobias, like social phobia. People get so tied up in social phobia, they get so anxious that they can't go outside. They can't interact with people. I had a guy, Bruce Caruth. He was one of my instructors a while back. 60 years ago? Holy shimolies. No, that's wrong. 55 years ago. And he said the way you can tell that somebody's got social phobia is that is you ask them the then what questions. And I thought, okay, Bruce, whatever. Every once in a while, Bruce would say something to me and I couldn't figure it out. So I'd just go and have lunch or something. But this one he explained to me. And he said, when somebody comes in and they say, well, I can't leave the house because I can't leave the house. And Bruce said, well, then you have to say, well, if you left the house, then what? Well, if I left the house, this would happen. Well, if that would happen, then what? Well, then such and such would happen, and such and such would happen. Well, if such and such and such and such happened, then what? Well, then I would be so anxious I would pass out. And if you were anxious and you passed out, then what? And the answer in the end is always, then people will look at me.
Mm.
And I thought, I don't believe him. That seems too simple. But it taught me something that many of the best answers really are simple. When I started getting complicated is when I got screwed up. But it really is true that around anxiety, I'm afraid that somewhere way out at the end, there is this terrible thing that's going to happen that I can't even anticipate. So what are you afraid of? I have no clue. How do you tell the difference between fear and anxiety? Well, you're going to hook people up to all kinds of sensors and everything, galvanic skin response and blood pressure and heart rate and all the rest of it. Put an EKG, I'm sorry, EEG on their head. EKG is the chest. Hook them up like that and then scare the daylights out of them. Make a recording. And then hook them up when they're really, really anxious. And you say to them, what are you afraid of? And they'll tell you, I don't know. I don't know. But their recording will be identical. Pathological anxiety is, I love this definition. I think I came up with it actually. Pathological anxiety is fear that has no reasonable object. Yeah.
Say it again.
Pathological anxiety, any of them, is fear that has no reasonable object. Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, I don't know that it's wonderful. I don't.
What's a great definition? Come on.
Yeah, it's a great definition. However,
Hey,
it's not easy for the person dealing with it.
give me some props here. I came up with a great definition.
It's it's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard.
Well, and that's what's frustrating when folks came in and sat down with me. They'd be aware that something was really misfiring in them. It was really, they were nuts. And they knew it. And they were sitting in front of me because you think about it, they had to be really aware that things weren't working for them because they're ready to sit down in front of a stranger and tell that stranger things about themselves they've told nobody else. Now that's desperation. And they had real awareness because they would sit there and they'd say, I don't know why I'm like this. I have absolutely no reason to be tied up in knots like this, but I am. Yeah. The sad thing,
Mm.
this is something you're really tuned into. I've heard you talk about this all the time. Really sad thing is that they'll be like this, they'll be feeling like this. Oh my God. Sometimes for years, 4 years before they become so desperate that they're willing to come in and talk to a stranger. So think of how long they suffered. And I think that happened because of the thing that you talk about, and that is, when are we going to desensitize people to things like this? When are we going to talk to them about this? When are we going to help them be okay with stuff like this?
Well, and it's where does it come from? Is it from parents that like that we that have these expectations of us, or that we think are? I know you said pathological anxiety has no base
Reasonable object.
reasonable object. However, I mean, I'll use myself for an example.
Okay.
So I feel anxiety every once in a while, especially when I want to do live videos on social media. I have a lot of anxiety around that. And I feel that it comes from me, is that in my family, we were all about looking good. We always had to look good. We had to dress properly. We didn't drink beer from a beer bottle.
Oh, oh, that's awful.
Well, because it wasn't ladylike. But to
Pretty
have,
gauche.
right? Um, so, I mean, it was even so much so that, you're a part of my nonprofit, mental illness refined. And I had started posting on social media, and I was getting all this really great attention. And then that night, I dreamt that I had screws in my throat. And to me, that was anxiety. That was me going to bed worried about me speaking my truth. I mean, and I woke up the next morning and I literally felt something in my throat. And so it didn't just come from nowhere. I didn't just, I mean, I may have been making up stories in my head. However, there was a basis for it. I feel that's kind of the environment that I was raised in,
Okay,
right?
that's anxiety. What's the reasonable object? I mean, if I take out a gun and I slide back the slide and I point it at you, that gun's a reasonable object. Oh yeah. The or that dog snarling in your face. That's a reasonable object. Oh yeah. Or the meteor, if it's science fiction, that meteorite coming down, reasonable object. Be afraid. Be very afraid. But what were you afraid of if you were anxious about what you were doing? That people would look at you, right?
Yeah,
Bruce is right. It always boils down to that.
yeah. And I when you said that, I felt that. But I want people to hear that, like it's not just a kind of thing that they're making up in their head, but there's reasons why as well. Some of them are feeling that way. That it, it's that it's not their fault even,
No,
right?
no
Um,
question.
but there's something in their life. When I was in sixth grade, I had a teacher. I brought in the wrong homework assignment that she gave us on a Friday afternoon. I don't know who gives kids homework assignments on Friday, but
Well,
and
you unlike me, you didn't have a lot of nuns.
no, no, no.
I had a lot of nuns. Oh yeah.
Only 2 years of my life I went to Catholic school. Um, But she had yelled at me in front of the entire class, and then so I think that it was part of my family and part schooling, right? Where it was, oh, if you don't bring in the correct homework, you're going to get berated in front of people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So, but it does it, and with all of that, everybody who has pathological anxiety, we can trace that back to, in some cases, a series of things in their youth that had them operating in a certain sort of way or reacting in a certain sort of way given certain stimuli. But it always comes out the same, and that is, I'm afraid. What the hell am I afraid of? Have no clue. I mean, I can look back and say, well, I know where it started. I don't like being yelled at, and I don't like people. But you know, I remember the worst case of anxiety I ever had, public speaking anxiety. It was the weirdest thing. I broke the zipper on the fly in my pants
Mhm.
about 20 minutes before I was supposed to go out there and talk and do a version of the Gettysburg Address. Now, I mean, I hear people telling me they're anxious about public speaking because they're afraid that they'll forget to pull their fly up. I mean, is that a reasonable object? Who cares your fly is down? Who notices your fly is down? I don't know. But boy, that can just seize you up with anxiety. Where'd it come from? Doesn't matter. Let me tell you what I was afraid of. I found a sewing kit. I sewed my fly shut. Now I'm standing out there trying to do the Gettysburg Address and praying to God I didn't have to pee. Now, physiologically, that was fear running all over the place. And it was about being afraid I'd have to pee or being afraid people would see that my fly was down. Did that serve me in any way? No, I think in that particular instance, it meant that I didn't have a chance of winning that competition because I was tied up with anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, ultimately, there's the one big source of anxiety that you relate to, and that is trauma and early learning and stuff like that. Another source of anxiety that comes from more recent kind of learning, and that is if you had a really, really, really scary event, and it imprints itself on you, and without working on it, never going to be the same again. Uh, you self-disclosed, I'll self-disclose. I, up until I was 23, 24 years old, um, I don't know where it came from, but I was absolutely fearless when it came to heights. Didn't bother me. I don't know. I'd climb 40, 50 feet up a cable to get onto a ladder so I can crawl another 100 feet up to the top of a water tower. Not a problem. And then one day, I was helping to put up Halloween decorations, and I was on a 16-foot ladder, and it started to shake. Okay, that was the end of it. I have never been able to do heights again.
Because the ladder was shaking. Did you actually fall?
No, I was scared. I had never been scared of heights before. I was gut wrenching, freeze at the top of the ladder, scared. Nothing in my childhood about that, clearly, because you would find me in places I shouldn't be because I didn't have a fear of heights. After that, I no, I can get up a 3 foot ladder, but I have to have somebody holding it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you
So
don't know where that came from. It was just a
I,
feeling when you
I
were up.
know where it came. I know where it came from. I was afraid I was going to fall. Boom. That's it.
Yeah, but you can fall anywhere.
No, I didn't. But I didn't have to die to be afraid of death. No, just afraid I was going to fall. It didn't have to come from someplace. It just was.
So you've never
Now,
been on a 16-foot ladder since?
oh no. And I have a 20-foot ladder.
Was
It's
never lit.
only slightly used. Yeah. And I am a psychologist and I have lots of psychology friends, and they will come to me and they will say, Bill, you know that phobias like yours, anxiety disorders like yours, are one of the things we can absolutely cure all the time. And I'll say, no, thank you. Now, I'm saying this because my wife is not in the room, but my wife has never asked me to go up on the roof and fix anything. She has never asked me to paint the second floor of our house. She understands that if I get higher than 3 feet on the ladder, I don't do well. So this is one of those occasions when the prospect of anxiety serves me well, so I don't want to be cured. I just I don't get up on high things anymore
Yeah.
because I have anxiety. Now, if I were a steel worker and that stopped me from doing my job, well, then I'd seek treatment and people would desensitize me and teach me how not to be anxious.
Yeah. Or you can get a new job. So you've never been on a Ferris wheel? Or after 25, you've never been on a Ferris wheel? Or is that something different?
That is, no, I haven't been on a Ferris wheel actually. No, I'm trying to remember if I have. I went to, in Wildwood, I went on the Wild Mouse, which is a kind of a strange roller coaster. And halfway up, I threw up. Yeah. No, don't do that no more. No, no. And the strange thing is that being in an airplane does not bother me at all. But if I'm in a 20-story building and the windowsills are too low and I get too close to that window, then I seize up. Yeah, that's anxiety. That's one form of anxiety that we call phobia, but yeah, it's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I don't know if you've been monitoring our time. Have you been? How are we doing?
Oh, we're about 26 minutes.
Well, then I'll tell a quick story
Okay.
if it's okay. Or maybe I will just wait until the next time and start it off with the quick story. Let's do that. Let's do that. But I will close with saying one thing is that um, sometimes people seek the cause of this anxiety that they brought to me, but it can sometimes be so small, like me on that ladder, or so hidden in the weirdness of their past, of their childhood, or whatever. But they never really do know. But they don't need to in order to stop being anxious and to learn how to live their lives more fearlessly. And so I think that one of the things we might want to talk about next time is some of the things you and I can suggest to people to deal with their anxieties.
I
What do
would
you
like
think?
Yes. There were quite a few things when I woke up that morning and felt like I had screws in my throat that I did to get rid of that anxious feeling. So I think that would be great to share that with.
That would be way cool, wouldn't it?
Awesome. Well, we're just about wrapped up here. So thank you for joining us.
Okay.
If you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, any topics that you would like to talk to us, that you would like us to talk about, please reach out to us. You can email at hello@truthbetold.world. hello@truthbetold.world. Ciao.
Ciao.